Hey everybody, this is Joe Greco with Greco Arcana, and I wanted to make a post about atheism. So, one of the things that surprised me as I started making, videos on the Western esoteric tradition, the ancient mysteries, tarot, Freemasonry, and all of that, I kind of expected that maybe since I talk about, since I obviously have a Gnostic worldview, that I would get some like heretical callings from certain denominations. That I kind of expected, and funny enough, I didn't. I received kind of the opposite of that, like open conversation and like not like condescending, nasty attitudes. So that part's been great. What I wouldn't have expected is kind of like challenges to theories coming from atheists. Not like that I'm surprised they don't agree with me on things, but I'm kind of surprised that they look up tarot videos and that they follow Freemasonry hashtags. That's a little surprising to me. So what I want, and look, I don't normally engage with that group of people, because I've been there. I went through a period of my life where I was, closer to atheism. I went through a period of my life where I didn't think that like the world was a dead world, but or the universe was a dead universe of just matter and energy. I never really went that far into it, but I rejected a lot of what would be considered like what would be a part of my spirituality today. So I usually just don't get into it. Like I think I'm more of a clever man than a smart man, so I'm probably not going to change your mind on things, and I don't really feel there's a need to. But I did decide to write up a little something just to kind of address atheism as a whole, especially when it comes to the work that I do. So, and this kind of got born out of a community member or an Instagram friend or whatever they're called, kind of just being like, well, what do you even think of atheism? So I wrote this up and I wanted to make a video on it. So my answer to like, what do I even think of atheism is that the real problem there is not like a private doubt. Okay. The real problem is there isn't really an atheism without materialism. And that's a worldview that it says there's no God, right? No soul, no divine intelligence, no logos, no higher moral law, no sacred order to things. I mean, literally that the coin is just matter, and there's not a second side of that coin that would be like a spiritual dimension. Okay, you have matter, you have energy. I guess today you have social conditioning, and whatever temporary meaning that as humans we can kind of invent before we disappear. That's what I'm going to be criticizing. So, and not a person quietly like wrestling with their own belief, and not someone who had any bad experience with religion. This isn't religious, and definitely not someone who rejects like the third grade image of God. And like for people that like it's fighting the monarch in the sky, it's like, well, okay, congratulations. Most serious practitioners or theologians or mystics, or anything, Hermeticists, Platonists, Masons, they're not exactly losing sleep defending the God of a third grade coloring book. Okay, so in that case, when those attacks are levied, it's like, great, you've defeated a cartoon. Wonderful. But that version of God, I think, is held foremost in the mind, but that's not what deeper traditions are talking about. Okay, deeper traditions, Hermeticism, Gnosticism, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, and all of the ancillary and orders that came forth from that tradition. Their question is whether there's a higher order, okay? Whether consciousness and things that are taken by consciousness, like beauty, morality, symbolism, love, right? And then things like attached to love, like this, like sacrifice. Stuff like the soul. Is the soul real? Is it a feature of the cosmos? Or are all of these things just like strange side effects inside a nervous animal with a smartphone? Okay, that's where the real argument begins. But what we've watched over the last few centuries in atheistic materialism is that it's effectively risen as a replacement for religion. And that's the part that people don't want to admit. Atheistic materialists love to say, we are not religious, we're rational. No, you're religious. You just have a very boring religion. Atheistic materialism didn't abolish religion. It threw off the cloaks and put on a lab coat, okay? And then it acted offended when anyone noticed that the lab coat and the cloak kind of look the same when you're preaching. It has its own priesthood. That priesthood is expert consensus, not general consensus, expert consensus, okay? And it has its own heresy. And that's metaphysics. And its promised heaven is a world where every mystery has been explained downward. Okay? Every ritual has been pathologized. How do you say that? I don't know. Every symbol's been flattened, and every soul has just been like kind of renamed as some type of brain activity. That's not the end of religion. That is religion, but just with the beauty portion removed. And God, this really just takes me to the Holy Royal Arch degree. Okay. This is where it becomes grotesque, though. Okay, the atheistic materialist can look at the invention of a laptop and they see a pinnacle of human achievement, and it is a awesome one for sure. Okay, but then they look at their own son or daughter or their wife, and the only way they can describe them in a paradigm that fits their worldview is as like a temporary bundle of nerves. Okay, of like nerves and organs, and anxiety and whatever, and there's no spirit behind the eye, their own child's eyes. That's not maturity. That's a civilization that has become better at recognizing machines than its own children. Okay, and then it calls this science. It's not science. It's a philosophy. Science is a method for studying the measurable world. Atheistic materialism is what happens when that method becomes religion. It leans into its own importance. And it does that by declaring that nothing exists outside of what its instruments can detect. If its instruments can't detect it, it's superstition. And this is something I got from a podcast. I don't remember where, but shout out. But even the word science is useful here. Okay, so science comes from the Latin scientia. It's been a long time since I was in Jesuit school and was taking Latin, so I'm probably not saying any of these words right. But science comes from this word scientia, which means knowledge. Okay, and scientia comes from sire, which means to know. But many etymologies, they trace sire, that part, deeper to an older root meaning, which meant to cut or split, to separate or distinguish. And that's perfect. right? Because that is what science does beautifully. It cuts, it distinguishes, right? By cutting and separating, it takes the living whole and says, okay, let's isolate this piece so we can understand it. And that's not bad, right? I mean, I'm definitely not anti-science. In the right hands, it's brilliant. We've seen so much brilliance from science. But science by itself, of course, is going to struggle with the biggest picture. Okay? Because the biggest picture is not about cutting things apart. It's what happens when you put it all together. You can't create dimensions. Your job is to put all of the dimensions together in one picture. Okay? Into one creation. Maybe one consciousness. But definitely one divine order. Okay? I see it as matter is one face of reality, and the logos is the other. But there's no room for that in a worldview that only trusts the knife. Okay? You can't dissect your way into unity. Atheistic materialism is like a man with a metal detector walking across the beach, okay, and they don't find any fish, so their conclusion is the ocean is empty. That's the level of arrogance that I see in it, right? Not the doubt. Doubt can be honest. Doubt is almost always honest, right? The arrogance is the assumption that if atheistic materialism can't detect something, then that something must not be real. A person that can't hear sound probably shouldn't be writing books on silence. Okay, and this is where the old first cause arguments still matter. Okay, if you look at the world around you, nothing we actually observe in nature simply appears from nowhere. Right? A child has parents, a tree came from a seed, a flame needs fuel, a building has a builder. And anything that moves, there's a prime mover. There's something that has put it in motion. Nothing just moves on its own. Okay? Not even the wind. Everything has something that moves it. Every rock was created by a process. All of it has there is a something has put it all in motion. And cause and effect, it's not some like religious hallucination. It's the basic structure of how we experience reality. But then the atheistic materialist wants to tell me that the entire order of existence, okay? Matter, energy, physics, consciousness, things like evolution, somehow nothing else needs, everything else needs a prime mover, everything. But the creation of all things together, some of the most intricate systems that we still haven't even figured out physics and metaphysics and how they all fit together, that didn't require a source. Everything inside the universe needs explanation, but the universe itself, no explanation needed there, okay? Just move along. Look, that's not reason. That's a special attempt. That's a special exemption disguised as courage. The older philosophers, they understood this kind of stuff better, right? Aristotle speaks of the unmoved mover. Aquinas gives the argument of the first cause. Augustine is what I was using with the prime mover. He thought deeply about creation, time, and God as being the source of all of that, and being itself, right? So these are different languages, but they're the same basic cut or wound in materialism. You can't explain the chain of causes by pointing to another link in the chain forever and then acting like you've answered the question. At some point, the mind must ask, why is there anything at all? Why is there order? Why does mathematics describe the cosmos? Why did consciousness arise in a universe that you claim is dead? And I think the typical answer from an atheistic materialist would be like, well, given enough time, all of these things would happen. Given enough, like, that's what I tend to hear. So magic does become acceptable as long as no one calls it God, right? That's the trick. They reject miracle in religion, and then they smuggle miracle into the origin of literally everything. Give them one unexplainable explosion at the beginning, and then after that, they're going to lecture you about believing in mystery. It's incredible, okay? And this is where the Enlightenment itself becomes important. We're always told this like sweet little bedtime story about the Enlightenment and its effect on the modern world, right? That religion, it had its age. Mysticism had its age. And then science arrived and humanity matured, okay? The Enlightenment didn't invent reason. Plato had reason. Aristotle had reason. Who are we talking about? Augustine had reason. Aquinas had reason. I mean, like, medieval scholars had reason. The architects of cathedrals obviously had reason, right? And the astronomers of their day had reason. The Enlightenment didn't discover reason, right? What it did is it started cutting reason away from the sacred order. And that's a very different thing. Because you can cut something too much. Right? Reason, when it's this beautiful IKEA lamp right next to me, is beautiful. But reason, if that lamp was a chainsaw, it might be a problem. The scientific revolution gave man enormous power to measure and predict things. And it measured basically by dissecting and classifying. Remember, the whole cut science is to cut thing, right? And that's how it controlled the physical world. That power is real, and it changed everything. But it also trained modern man to believe that if something can't be measured by current instruments, if it can't be cut apart, if it can't be classified or categorized, if they can't reproduce it under conditions that they're controlling, then it must be not real. To me, I mean, that's just a mistake. So science became so good at studying the parts that modern man, in my opinion, started forgetting the whole. This, like, the soul is never going to show up in an autopsy. God doesn't appear when you look under a microscope. You know, if you're looking for meaning in a petri dish, I don't know, you're probably not going to find it there. And you're going to be like, well, I found no evidence. Of course you didn't. You used the knife to look for unity. Right? That's like trying to weigh a song. And then the Enlightenment mind takes this power and says, well, what if we redesign society too? Wonderful. That sentence has probably killed more people than any other religion. Because when man loses reverence, which is obviously the case, this is the world we live in now, but keeps their intelligence, right? Intelligence doesn't make you wise. So now you can become dangerous. I was listening to another podcast, shout out to whoever that was, and they were talking about the French Revolution. And, like, that's the most obvious example to me. Like, I was listening, it was Dan Carlin, I don't remember, but they were talking about the French Revolution. And it's like, we're rational now. We're liberated. We have thrown off the old order. And, like, immediately comes the reign of terror. And the symbol of this rational takeover was the guillotine. I mean, like, Europe's on fire. Napoleon is just running through countries. There's misery and starvation. The guillotine is just going overtime. It's like the mascot for this whole revolution. And this is all like what's claiming to be guided by reason. And listen, and here's the funny thing. It makes perfect sense symbolically. The age of cutting gives itself a machine for cutting off heads. Subtle? No? Okay. But accurate? Unfortunately, yes. And that pattern keeps repeating. Modern man says the old sacred order is oppressive. Let's tear it down and let's build something rational. Then the new rational order starts needing committees, bureaucracies, propaganda, like ideological purity tests, prisons. And eventually that new rational order needs bodies. And then everyone stands around confused. Like, how did this happen? We are so enlightened. No, because intelligence without reverence doesn't ascend. It's not going to get better. It does not go upward. We just have industrialized the fall. This is also like where humans get twisted. Humanism. The way people talk about humanism today compared to like original humanism, it like couldn't be further apart. Original humanism wasn't like an atheistic TED talk, right? The original humanism was still breathing Christian air. You look at someone like Sir Thomas More. Is he a humanist? Yes. He believes human beings have agency. He believed that man can think and reform, and man can participate in making the world a better place. But with More, man is not replacing God, and that's the key. More was still Catholic. He's still operating inside a sacred order. So man still has dignity, right? But that dignity comes because he participates in something much greater, much higher than himself. Humanists from then would say man has dignity because man participates in a divine order. The modern materialist version of humanism says man has dignity because man says so. That's a little bit thinner, wouldn't you say? That doesn't sound like a great foundation for me. The Renaissance itself, I know, like I'm attacking the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, and now the Renaissance. I'm obviously a caveman. But even the Renaissance itself showed the tension. On one hand, it recovers magnificent things, right? The Renaissance was the time when they were discovering Plato again, and like, you know, this Plato's works are now like, or ideas are just ripping through Europe. And you know, due to Ficino, I believe he's the one that translated Plato, and he translated the Hermetic texts. Pico della Mirandola, take a shot every time I mention Pico della Mirandola in a video. But he spoke of dignity of man, right? But in this like grand spiritual metaphysical sense. You had art and geometry and music and architecture, astrology, magic, Christian theology, Christian mysticism, pagan philosophy, everything. The whole cauldron of Europe started like bubbling again. And that part of the Renaissance is magnificent, amazing. But the Renaissance is also probably where the dumpster fire got lit. Because once man rediscovers his power, there's always the danger that he forgets the source of that power. At first, man was a microcosm, right? Then man is like the measure. Then man is the master. And now man is God. right? And what is this godly man? It's a nervous mammal with Wi-Fi. Okay, that's the downward slide. That wasn't an ascension. The Renaissance opens the old books, but the modern world eventually just tears out all of the altar pages. Right? But it like kept the diagrams. It wanted the art. Like, we love the art from that era, but not the devotion. We want to separate that. We love the geometry from that era, but we don't want the sacred proportion. That must be separated, must be cut away. We love the magic of like human possibility. That was music and art and all things. But we didn't want to keep the discipline of the soul. And once all this happened, atheistic materialism just came in and just burned down the cathedral, right? It takes this already weakened humanism and basically says, actually, man is not even a spiritual being. Man is just biology. He's a chemistry. He's a bundle of nerves, mixed up organs, and like somehow that, we look back on that as progress. So we began with man as the image of God, right? Then man is like this dignified, I'm trying to think of like a good way to describe like Leonardo, like this, dignified microcosm, right? Then man becomes, like post-French Revolution, like a rational citizen. And then we get into even more modern times, and man becomes what? An economic unit? Now, like, man is just some biological machine, no soul, no spirit. And we're quickly heading to the point where man is just data. Like, that's right in front of us. Okay, so now we have the nerve to wonder why everyone is anxious, why everyone's narcissistic, why, like, you can't watch social media without hearing about how lonely people are. Well, they're all spiritually malnourished. I mean, it's not complicated. You can keep reducing man, but how are you going to expect him to remain noble? The original humanists were still borrowing light from heaven. Modern materialist humanism is like trying to run an entire civilization on like dead batteries. Religion, once it no longer governs the public imagination at all, has basically just been placed on a little reservation, right? It's like a spiritual little petting zoo. Science and religion didn't coexist. Like, make no mistake about that. The condescension, like, there's like, you can be like Protestant or Catholic or Jewish or Muslim in the United States. Like, you can have your little ritual, your 1 day a week ritual. But the effort is huge. The condescension is huge. That it's not a part of the public square anymore. It's like I said, on a little reservation. Like, it's like, okay, you guys can keep that. We're going to keep cutting away your place in the public square, but you can keep this for now. And it'll be interesting for us to see you guys on your way to church or lodge or temple or whatever. Religion and spirituality is like something that I think in the modern world you're allowed to use it or visit it, like when you're in grief. You need support when like Christmas music is playing. Or you need to say something like solemn at like a wake, right? That's in the modern world. That's when it's still like okay to turn to that. But when like serious adults start discussing what man actually is, what reality is, what society exists for, what actually counts as truth, at that point, religion is expected to like sit quietly in the corner. Like, go play with your Legos. And if it doesn't, like, they don't burn you at the stake anymore, right? We're way more advanced now. They just make you completely unserious. That's the modern Inquisition. It's not fire, it's condescension. Oh, there's a great term. Shout out Jimmy Dore. Came up with this. Smugnorant. Don't you love that? Smugnorant. There's no need to kill the mystic anymore. You just make sure he's not cited in anything realistic, in anything, I can't think of the word for it, but in anything like important, in anything of any magnitude. Just don't cite the mystic and they'll go away. And that's why, going back to this the whole beginning of this, that's why I have so little patience for like evangelical atheism, the new atheist, this missionary of materialism. All right. It's not like just a person that has his doubts and doesn't believe. They need everyone to disbelieve. Right? That they're not I don't see these people as free thinkers. Right? They're street preachers. They have the same temperament as like a religious fundamentalist. Right? And they know it. They don't have a living question left. Right? They don't enter into a conversation to listen. They enter into the conversation to correct. And for the tradition that I talk about on here, that's fatal to the initiatic mind. Right? Because the initiatic mind begins in mystery. Freemasonry, at its best, doesn't ask a man to arrive like with a fully formed theology. That's not what, it's not a requirement. It just asks whether he recognizes that there is someone above him, that there's a moral law, that there's a higher order, some kind of mystery that humbles the ego. That's why the old Masonic language about like, oh my God, what is it? Not stupid atheist. A religious libertine. That's why that matters. People hear that phrase now and panic because modern people have the spiritual pain tolerance of like wet tissue paper. All right, but the point is not that every doubter is stupid. The point is that there is a kind of atheism that's spiritually stupid, not intellectually stupid. Right? Like, I've made that clear. Doubt's natural, but it's spiritually stupid. It's spiritually dense. It looks at consciousness and beauty and love, you know, and ritual and symbol. And death. All of these things. And it says that there's just nothing to see here. It's just matter. It's just energy. And look, to me, why do I not engage with that with people? Why do I not have these conversations? Because to me, that's not sophistication. You know, that's just blindness. That's willful blindness. And the irreligious libertine is the other half of the same disease. Right? If there's nothing higher than matter, then all your life is your appetites. Right? It's just about being pleasured and comfortable or having status. You know, there's no initiatic tradition. There's no purification. There's no temple. There's no ascent. It's just like your desire and whatever you can fit on your credit card. That's basically the modern consumer. Now, this is where my whole borrowed ethics argument matters. Okay, because the atheist can be moral. And like, no one hates adding caveats and disclaimers. as much as I do, of like, well, I'm aware that an atheist can be good and a religious or spiritual person could be bad. That kind of stuff is so stupid to me. It's so toxic to have to do that kind of stuff. If you think I'm a bad person, don't watch my stuff. But of course an atheist can be moral, obviously. But the moral vocabulary that they'll use, it doesn't even come from atheistic materialism. Right? The sacredness of the person, protection of the weak, right? Suspicions of cruelty, even ideas like truth matters even when it costs you. These are cultivated through centuries of spiritual and religious philosophical ideas. Atheistic materialism inherited the estate, right? It took those ideas and then it sold all the furniture, and it mocks the ancestors, and now it wonders why this house feels empty. That's the modern condition. The room is getting cold because fire went out a while ago. For a time, a civilization can live on this inherited warmth. It can keep saying stuff like human dignity and rights and compassion. It can use like concepts like justice. It can continue to run on that long after it severed those words from the sacred order that actually gave them weight. But eventually, those words become slogans. And slogans don't hold civilizations together, right? Maybe they trend on Instagram. They virtue signal, but they're not initiating the soul. Atheistic materialism has no initiation. It has a lot of information. It can tell you exactly what the body is made up of, but it can't tell you what the body's for. Right? Like it can explain like the mechanics of music, but it can't explain the beauty. It can explain stuff like reproduction, but not love. Right? It can explain survival, but not sacrifice. And when it can't explain the higher thing, it doesn't bow before mystery. Right? It doesn't reach back to that. It just demotes it. Right? Love is just chemistry. Like prayer is coping. Mysticism is just like brain activity potentially from hallucinogens. The soul is basically like a metaphor. That's it. Like, what a miserable little gospel. And yet we call this progress. And we have more information than any civilization in history, right? But I think we have less wisdom than a small village. We could do amazing things like split the atom. You can get apps on your phone where it maps your genome, right? You can use artificial intelligence. Like we're shooting telescopes into deep space or into space to see into deep space. But like you can't look at your son or daughter and tell them why their life is sacred, right? So then what does a child do? He invents himself again and again and probably again. Because once God is removed, the self is what's going to rush to fill that vacancy. That is the narcissist. That's the narcissism of atheistic materialism. It doesn't not always look arrogant at first. Oh, that was an awful way to say that. It doesn't always come across as arrogance, right? Sometimes it looks like liberation. Like, oh, it's my truth, my identity, my happiness, my expression, my will. Shout out Gen Z. But this ego, it's a god. It's just a terrible one, right? It's petty. It's hungry. It's fragile. It's easily offended. It's never satisfied, right? Just driven by its appetites. And modern society is full of people worshiping this little god, right? And then they're wondering why everyone's exhausted. That's what atheistic materialism has produced. It didn't produce, people think back to the Enlightenment and it's going to create strong men and women freed from superstition. It's created spiritually weightless people just floating around between consumption and outrage, using therapy language all the time, looking for just entertainment, and just generally feeling despair. It's a comfortable dystopia. Not chains and fire, okay? But I think this is something worse in a lot of ways. Just sitting on the couch. What do we call it now? Couch rotting, brain rotting? I don't know. Just sitting on the couch, looking at your glowing screen, waiting for your DoorDash. I mean, this is not liberation. This is what happens when you remove the sacred order. That's not liberation. That's just being sedated. So no, I don't accept atheistic materialism. Not because it's too advanced an idea and I have this old caveman brain. To me, it's just too small. The initiatic view is different. The world is not dead matter. It's a temple. Man is not some accident of biology. He is a soul, and that soul is under construction. And symbol isn't decorations to make a lodge look cool. It's a doorway, okay? The ritual, I've shout out how many times I've said this in a video. Ritual isn't a theater, okay? It's a participation in the actual sacred order. And God is not some failed scientific theory. God is the mystery in which science itself becomes possible. God is the mystery that created things that would need science to explain it. So yeah, that's why I just can't accept atheistic materialism as the final truth. It's not that science is explaining too much. It's just that it's explaining too little. And then it's congratulating itself for extreme simplicity. And to me, the world and consciousness, it's way stranger than that. Man is way deeper than that. The sacred hasn't vanished just because modern people have stopped noticing it. Right? So I'm happy that there's still groups out there that participate in the mysteries and the sacred order. All right, guys, that's it for me.